The transport ship hummed as it descended through Earth's atmosphere, and Commander Lyra watched the blue planet grow larger in the viewport with something twisting in her chest that felt dangerously close to hope. She had spent 2 decades monitoring humanity from orbit and cataloging their progress and filing reports that no one in the Galactic Council seemed to read anymore, and now finally they were sending someone down, and of course it had to be her. The irony wasn't lost on Lyra as she checked her reflection in the darkened console screen, and her silver skin caught the light in ways that still startled her, even after 30 standard years, and her eyes were too large and too violet, and her features were delicate in a way that made humans stare. 20 years ago, she had been a junior xenobiologist fresh out of the academy and eager to study the newly discovered species on Earth, and she had watched them from her research station and learned their languages and fallen completely and impossibly in love with the idea of them. Then the Council had declared humans too primitive for contact and sealed Earth behind a quarantine field, and Lyra had been reassigned, but she had requested to stay on monitoring duty, and everyone thought she was dedicated to her research, but the truth was more pathetic than that. The truth was that she had seen one human in particular during those early scans, and his name was Danny Carter, and he had been a rescue worker in a coastal city, and Lyra had watched him pull people from floodwaters during a hurricane, and she had seen him comfort a child who had lost her parents, and she had observed him sit alone on his apartment balcony at night looking up at the stars. She had told herself it was anthropological interest, but she had tracked his life for months before the quarantine went up, and she had seen him laugh with friends and argue with his brother and rescue a dog from traffic, and somewhere in all that watching, she had crossed a line that xenobiologists were never supposed to cross. When the Council sealed Earth, she had lost her direct observation access, but she had stayed on the monitoring station and risen through the ranks and spent 20 years analyzing data streams and satellite footage and telling herself she was being professional. She had watched Danny become a firefighter and then a fire captain, and she had seen him date a woman named Patricia for 3 years. And Lyra had felt something ugly and possessive burn in her chest when they kissed, and then she had felt guilty relief when they separated amicably. She had observed him age from 25 to 45, and the gray that now touched his temples made him more attractive, somehow. And she hated herself for thinking that because he didn't know she existed, and he never would. Except now the Council had lifted the quarantine because humanity had developed fusion technology and passed the threshold for potential membership, and they were sending diplomatic teams to major cities, and Lyra had volunteered to lead the team in Danny's city. Her second-in-command, Kayeth, thought she was insane for choosing such a small location when she could have gone to New York or London, and he didn't understand why his normally logical commander wanted to visit a mid-sized coastal city in the Pacific Northwest. The ship landed in a designated area near the waterfront, and Lyra smoothed her diplomatic robes and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her chest that her species didn't usually experience, and this was stupid. And she was being stupid. And Danny probably wouldn't even be at the official greeting. Except he was. The city had apparently decided to honor their emergency services personnel by including them in the first contact ceremony. And Danny stood in his dress uniform, among a row of other first responders, and his eyes were the same warm brown she remembered, and he looked calm, while others around him fidgeted. Mayor Linda Brooks gave a speech about humanity's hopes for peaceful cooperation, and Lyra delivered her prepared remarks about cultural exchange and mutual growth, and the whole time she was hyper-aware of Danny standing 30 feet away. After the ceremony, there was a reception, and Lyra found herself gravitating toward the first responder section of the room like a planet caught in orbit, and she told herself it was diplomatic thoroughness. Danny was talking to another firefighter when she approached, and he turned and met her eyes and smiled in a way that made her centuries-old heart do something complicated. "Hello, and welcome to Earth," he said, and his voice was deeper than it had sounded in the surveillance recordings. "And you must be Commander Lyra. And I'm Danny Carter with the City Fire Department." She shook his hand and cataloged the warmth of his skin and the calluses on his palm, and the fact that he held eye contact without fear or aggression, just honest curiosity. "I'm pleased to meet you," she said, and tried to sound professional. "And your city is beautiful." "Thanks, and we like it," he said with an easy grin. "And though I gotta say, after watching your ship land, I feel like our architecture might seem pretty primitive." Not primitive, she said too quickly, and just different. And your species has remarkable aesthetic sensibilities. They talked for 20 minutes about the city and Earth's culture and nothing important at all. And Lyra memorized everything, and the way he laughed and the gesture he made when he was emphasizing a point, and the kindness in his eyes that she had seen through cameras but was overwhelming in person. Over the following weeks, she found excuses to return to the city for follow-up, diplomatic sessions, and she attended community meetings and cultural demonstrations, and somehow, Danny was often there. He was friends with the mayor's assistant, and he volunteered at community events, and he seemed genuinely interested in learning about her people, and Lyra told herself that was the only reason she kept seeking him out. They started having coffee at a waterfront cafe, and ostensibly to discuss human-galactic relations, but really they talked about everything else. And Danny told her about growing up near the ocean and losing his mother to cancer when he was 17 and why he became a firefighter. She told him carefully edited versions of her life and her home planet's 3 moons, and her brother, who was a stellar cartographer, and the music of her people. What she didn't tell him was that she had watched him for 20 years and that she knew about his fear of heights that he hid well, and his habit of listening to old Earth jazz when he couldn't sleep, and the scar on his left shoulder from a building collapse 8 years ago. She didn't tell him that she had filed reports recommending contact with humanity, partly because she believed in their potential, but mostly because she couldn't bear being separated by the quarantine field anymore. 3 months into the cultural exchange program, Danny asked her to dinner at his apartment, and just as friends he clarified, but the way he looked at her suggested he was hoping for more. Lyra accepted, and spent an hour obsessing over what to wear before choosing simple off-duty clothes and arriving at his building, with 2 bottles of her planet's fruit wine that was probably too expensive a gift for a casual dinner. His apartment was modest, and filled with books, and the walls had photos of people she recognized from her surveillance and family and friends, and a life fully lived. Danny cooked pasta, and they sat on his balcony as the sun set over the ocean, and he asked about her family and her career and why she had chosen Earth for her assignment. I believed in humanity's potential, she said, and which was true but incomplete, and your people have something special and a resilience and creativity that the galaxy needs. He smiled and looked out at the water, and I used to sit here at night and look up at the stars and wonder if anyone was looking back. Lyra's chest tightened, because she remembered those nights, and she had been looking back, and she had been watching him, with longing she had no right to feel. Someone was, she said quietly, and I was. Danny turned to her with surprise in his eyes, and, you were watching Earth. I was watching everything she said and tried to backtrack because this was dangerous territory, and monitoring the planet and cataloging your development, and it was my assignment. But something in her voice must have betrayed her because Danny's expression shifted, and he looked at her with sudden intensity. And how long were you watching? 20 years, she admitted, and because the quarantine lasted that long and I requested to stay on monitoring duty. 20 years, he repeated slowly, and you watched us for 20 years before coming down. Lyra nodded, and her heart was pounding, and she knew she should change the subject, but she was tired of hiding. Did you? And Danny paused, and his eyes searched her face, and did you watch me specifically? She could lie, and she should lie, and this was wildly inappropriate and violated about 17 protocols, but she was so tired of pretending. Yes, she whispered, and I saw you during the initial surveys, and you were, and she struggled for words that wouldn't sound insane, and I became interested in your life, and I watched you, and I'm sorry, and I know that's a violation of privacy, and it's unprofessional, and I shouldn't have. Danny was quiet for a long moment, and Lyra braced for disgust or anger. But when he spoke, his voice was wondering instead. You've been watching me for 20 years, and you saw me grow up and change careers and probably make an idiot of myself more times than I can count. Yes, she said miserably. And you still wanted to meet me. Lyra looked up at him in confusion, and, of course, and you're, and everything I observed made me more certain that you were someone extraordinary. Danny laughed, and it wasn't cruel. Just amazed, and Lyra and I've been alone for most of my adult life, and I dated Patricia for a